Good evening and welcome to NTD UK News. I'm Stuart Leeson and here are today's top stories. The pandemic has caused a backlog of nearly 5 million routine operations in England. NATO is calling for de-escalation as Russian troops are building up near the Ukrainian border. And Heathrow Airport is warning of huge delays for arrivals as some people have to wait for up to 6 hours. The Royal College of Surgeons of England says it's been 5 years since the NHS last met the 18-week waiting times target. They say investment on a scale last seen in the 2000s is needed. The Prime Minister says the government will do whatever it takes to help the NHS beat the backlog. NTD's Neil Woodrow brings us more.
The government set the waiting time standard in 2004. It says that no one should have to wait longer than 18 weeks from GP referral to hospital treatment. It's part of the NHS constitution, and trusts continue to report performance against it monthly. But according to NHS data, the waiting list for hospital treatment is now 4.7 million, the highest since records began in 2007, and almost 400,000 patients have now been waiting over a year. This compares to about 1,600 people waiting over a year in February 2020. Prime Minister Boris Johnson commented.
This is a real priority now for our country. 4.7 million people on waiting lists. Of course, it's been exacerbated. It's been made worse by COVID. People, I don't think, have been going to hospital, haven't been going to use medical facilities in the way that they might have been throughout the pandemic.
The Vice President of the Royal College of Surgeons of England says the symptoms were there even before the pandemic, but the problem has now become chronic and needs long-term treatment. NHS England introduced a zero tolerance of any referral to treatment waits of more than 52 weeks in 2013-14. Cancer Research UK says urgent cancer referrals dropped in February by 8% on February 2020, and the data also shows a 6% reduction in the number of patients starting cancer treatment compared with February 2020. Kruti Shrotri of Cancer Research UK says while it's positive that urgent cancer referrals didn't plummet like they did in the first wave, these February figures show the cancer backlog continues to build. Johnson says the government will do whatever it takes to provide the NHS with the funding it needs to beat the backlog. COVID-19 continues to affect us all in so many ways, for some more than others. Neil Woodrow, NTD News, Epsom, Surrey.
The government's independent equalities watchdog is warning that vaccine passports could risk creating a two-tier society. It also warns against making vaccines mandatory.
The Equality and Human Rights Commission says COVID status certificates or vaccine passports could help open up society, but they could risk discriminating against some groups. According to the Guardian newspaper, in a submission to the government, the Commission says the passports could be a proportionate way of easing restrictions. But it warns the scheme risks further excluding some groups where vaccine take-up is lower due to access to services and employment. It suggests mandatory vaccine passports may amount to indirect discrimination and risk creating a two-tier society with only certain groups able to fully enjoy their rights. The watchdog also says blanket mandatory vaccination policies or a no jab, no job policy could be unlawful. The government has just started a public consultation on making vaccination a condition of deployment in older adult care homes. Government ministers are also suggesting that vaccine passports could be used for a limited time only and for certain events. For example, they will be trialled at the FA Cup final in May.
NATO is concerned over a build-up of Russian troops near the Ukrainian border. After an emergency meeting on Wednesday, the alliance is calling for de-escalation. Moscow says the build-up is in response to NATO threats.
The head of NATO on Wednesday called on Russia to pull back troops near Ukraine's border.
Allies fully support Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and we call on Russia to de-escalate immediately, stop its pattern of aggressive provocations, and respect its international commitments.
He was speaking after an emergency meeting of NATO foreign and defense ministers. NATO says the number of Russian troops massed on Ukraine's borders is the highest since 2014. Additionally, fighting has increased in recent weeks in eastern Ukraine. Government forces there have battled Russian-backed separatists in a 7-year conflict that Kiev says has killed 14,000 people. NATO is also concerned about Russia's troop buildup in Crimea. Russia annexed the peninsula from Ukraine in 2014. Ukraine's defense minister on Wednesday accused Russia of preparing to potentially store nuclear weapons in Crimea. US President Joe Biden called Russian President Vladimir Putin on Tuesday to propose a meeting of the estranged leaders. Ukraine's ambassador to the UK on Wednesday said he welcomed Biden's move and says he doesn't know Putin's motivation.
We don't know how far he's eager to go, what his internal position is, what his internal politics dynamics is dictating him. We just hope that with enough resolve and posture, we can tell him that's not easy, low-hanging fruit. He has to take advantage of it.
He's hopeful that the joint efforts will be able to avert a war. 2 US warships are due to arrive in the Black Sea this week. Russia warned Washington to stay away from Crimea. Moscow says the build-up is a 3-week snap military drill to test combat readiness in response to what it calls threatening behavior from NATO.
David Cameron has said he will cooperate positively in inquiries into his lobbying activities on behalf of finance company Greensill Capital.
The former Prime Minister David Cameron said through a spokesperson that he would respond positively to requests to give evidence. Prime Minister Boris Johnson said on Wednesday that he shares the widespread concern over lobbying, but he rejected Labour's call for a full parliamentary inquiry. Instead, the government commissioned an independent review, which will be led by corporate lawyer Nigel Boardman. But the Commons Treasury Committee said on Wednesday it will conduct its own investigation. Cameron personally contacted ministers on behalf of Greensill via text and email. He said he didn't break any rules and that the government stresses that Cameron's lobbying did not result in his desired aim.
The UK is to draw down its troops in Afghanistan as NATO withdraws from the country. The US declared a similar plan earlier this week after 2 decades of war.
Defence Secretary Ben Wallace confirmed the plan to withdraw British troops from Afghanistan from next month. He said, "The people of Afghanistan deserve a peaceful and stable future." He warned against attacks on Allied troops, calling the security of servicemen a priority and that any attack will be met with a forceful response. The UK no longer has combat troops in Afghanistan, aside from 750 who remained as part of the NATO mission to train local forces.
We've been saying it this
Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab said in a statement, "The UK will support an orderly departure of our forces whilst building up Afghanistan's capacity for self-governance and continuing counter-terrorism support to protect the gains made over the last 20 years. The US has around 2,500 troops in Afghanistan, while there are around 7,000 non-US forces from NATO countries and Australia, New Zealand and Georgia. An integral part of NATO's current mission, Resolute Support, is to train and equip Afghan security forces fighting the Taliban. The militant group was ousted from power in 2001 and has since waged an insurgency. The move to draw down troops could risk allowing the Taliban to regain power. This may erode efforts for democracy and women's rights established over the last 2 decades.
Heathrow Airport is warning of huge delays for arrivals passengers at border control. The UK's biggest airports are seeing bottlenecks as checks are made on arrival paperwork and against proof of a negative COVID-19 test.
And the situation is becoming untenable, and we're starting to see disruption in some of the arriving passengers. If you're made to queue for 2 or 3 hours, it's not something you want to do. And
on Wednesday, the Chief Solutions Officer at Heathrow told the Transport Select Committee that at present between 10,000 and 15,000 people arrive at Heathrow every day, and that more than half of them are delayed for up to 6 hours. This is due to new 100% checking of arrivals paperwork, which has to be done manually. He said he expects it will become a much bigger problem after May 17th, the earliest date at which international travel for holidays may resume. Garton told the committee the solution is to do a pre-travel virus check instead of checking at the arrival airport. The House of Commons will be able to vote next week to declare that Uyghurs in Xinjiang, China are suffering a genocide. The vote is likely to anger the Chinese Communist regime.
The Guardian newspaper reveals MPs will vote on a cross-party motion to declare that China's treatment of Uyghurs in Xinjiang is a genocide. The organizers hope at least 2/3 of MPs could back the motion on April the 22nd. The government believes international courts, nor the UK's Parliament, should decide whether there is a genocide in Xinjiang. The motion is non-binding, and it calls on the government to fulfill its obligations to prevent genocide and to bring it to an end. 2 of the UK's closest allies, the US and Canada, have already declared it a genocide. The new vote is likely to further deteriorate the UK's relations with China. The communist regime slapped sanctions on some MPs critical of its human rights record after the UK sanctioned some officials from Xinjiang. The Commons unanimously voted in 2016 to declare the Yazidis suffered genocide at the hands of the ISIS terrorist group.
An early-stage small-scale study found that a compound in magic mushrooms, Psilocybin, may be as effective as a leading antidepressant medication in a therapeutic setting. Imperial College scientists compared the compound with another leading antidepressant in 59 volunteers with moderate to severe depression over a 6-week period. They found that while depression scores were reduced in both groups, they reduced more quickly in the mushroom compound group, and the reductions were greater. The scientists urged caution though, saying larger and longer trials are required to further investigate. They also said patients with depression should not attempt to self-medicate with psilocybin. Still to come, the US saw the largest yearly increase in murders in 2020, with over 20,000 people killed. Find out more about that when we return.